guys, welcome to the Hollywood Dreams podcast. This is Santi, your host, along with my fellow host David. Hey Dave, how are you?
Santi, how you doing? Chuck, how are
I'm,
you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys? Nice to
I'm
see you.
doing great. For everyone listening or watching, we're tonight we're talking with Chuck Kawal from a little band called Captive Heart. I have the
Whoop.
CD here. Yeah, Chicago band from back in the day. A little different to what we usually have here. We tend to have more of the glam, sleazy Sunset Strip bands, but the more melodic hard rock bands. It's a type of genre that tend to gravitate to nowadays. So I'm really excited to for this episode. I believe Captive Heart is one of those bands that pop up a lot on the internet, like on this type of best of melodic rock gems or hidden gems from the 90s melodic rock. And at least I tend to see it a lot on those types of lists online, but I've never really known a lot about you guys. So when I found you on Facebook, I said, hey, I just really hoping you were going to accept being on the show because I really wanted to hear more. I was always so impressed, and I mentioned this to you before we started, but I was always so impressed by the quality of the I know these are demos, but I was always impressed by the quality of the recording. I mean, not only the songwriting and melody writing quality, which is
Mhm.
outstanding, but also the actual like sound production, right? It's fantastic. So I want to hear a lot about that. But I'm already talking too much. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And again, I wanted to thank you guys for being aware of the band and having me on. I'm looking forward to this. And it's always good, like I said, pre
Mhm.
the beginning of the official interview, that it's great to reminisce on stuff that you had a part in and really enjoyed doing. And hopefully there's still some life left in it, which it sounds like there is a bit, and people are aware of it in different countries and not only our little Chicago area, but worldwide. It's always surprises me. I guess I'm always amazed that people 30 years later kind of are aware of a band that really was obviously no Aerosmith or Def Leppard or anything remotely at that level.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, thank again for having me
And
on.
you guys are out of Chicago, and
Yeah.
what kind of bands did you cross paths with? Did you do any shows with like Enough's Enough or anything out of there? Or
Yeah, we actually did. I mean, I don't know how to retrospective this in some sort of an order, but um, I don't want to make this too lengthy of an answer either. But I guess it ties into what your question is. The specific project, the Captive Heart thing, was an outgrowth opposite of the way so many bands work. Most bands, as you probably are aware, they got a band together, they practice, they learn a bunch of cover tunes, even maybe, right? They start playing gigs, they write original material at the same time, then work up some savings and go into studios and make demos in hopes of getting somewhere, right? That's the usual, scenario. Ours functioned completely backwards. This thing was exclusively at first a recording project. The keyboard player and I, who had played in our very first band as kids, high school band, for it lasted 6 years actually, that first band. Um, we got back together again in about 1987, and I was already working. Part of my bio, I was already working as a recording engineer mixer at a recording studio in Chicago. So when I reconnected with the keyboard player, we both started working on these songs together. Either he would already have a pretty much finished idea, or I would, and we'd kind of finish each other's thoughts, like complete each other's songs. And we did have the luxury, even though we were sneaking in, we were doing this under the radar, but because I worked at the studio, we were able to get in last minute, 3 in the morning kind of stuff. and start recording these things. Had we gone like so many bands and had to go officially in and pay for this, these demos, which you guys hear as the final record, would have never been that quality because we wouldn't have had the money to do it.
Mm.
But we were able to pretty much do this free, at least up front. And that's how it came together. Down the line, I know, again, lengthy answer here, but we ended up we signed with ASCAP as writers, and then one of the ASCAP reps hooked us up with Jim Peterick. You guys familiar with Survivor,
Yeah.
the band Survivor, and Jim Peterick's written with many different people. And he started working with us. So we kind of, at some point, we played with those guys, which I guess is my long-winded answer to your question. Who did you tour with, right? So we played with Survivor. We played with Night Ranger. Remember Night Ranger?
Yeah.
Guys.
Yeah.
But nothing. But nothing was really lengthy. Most of what we were doing as far as shows at that point we did do our share of club shows and things too, but a lot of the stuff we did were showcases in Chicago, like to try to get signed to record deals. The big A&R guys would come out from LA or New York to Chicago, and they'd have these industry conventions, like a South by Southwest thing is now, if you're familiar with that, in Texas.
Right.
And so we were doing showcase gigs, whether it was for ASCAP, they sponsored one, or we did them other places. But we did do some opening gigs, After that Captive Heart band, which I won't go into my last band, that band ended up playing a lot more shows with opening up for a lot more artists, but that's a different story, different band.
So me and Santi kind of were talking about this earlier when we were talking about the album, which is fantastic, by the way. Even if it is demos, it's, some of the best demos I think I've ever heard. Did you guys was it just you and just certain individuals kind of put the music together first and then bring people in to do the live band, or?
Well, and you can really, if you listen to the record, you can hear the songs that we did on our own and the ones we did with Jim Peterick. It's a pretty obvious, it's almost like a studio versus live thing. So in the beginning, as I mentioned, it was the keyboard player and I did everything. We wrote the songs, I engineered and mixed them. He played keys, we programmed drums. Because another little side note, this was the era when we started on this, like Hysteria had come out, right, by Def Leppard. And we were huge. To this day, I am 30 something years later. My hero is Mutt Lange as a producer, right? Yeah. So that was like our Bible to go by. We didn't know how he did that stuff. We obviously didn't come close to it, but that was our template or our holy grail, trying to make a Hysteria kind of stuff, So they were obviously, and the public didn't know it much at the time, but they were obviously using drum machines and sequencers and stuff. It really wasn't live drums. So before we even had a band put together, we didn't even have the guys yet. Scott would program, that was the keyboard player's name. He would program the drums. I played guitar and bass. He did keys as a keyboard player. And then he was at first, if memory serves me, this is going back a ways, he at first wanted to, or we thought he would be the vocalist too. Whoops, I got an Adobe thing. I got to remember. Sorry, something popped up on my screen here. To be honest, he, the second he started singing, even though he and I were both, and the rest of our band, we were really good background vocalists, the harmony guys, oohs and ahs and all that stuff. He wasn't going to really cut it. I don't know if you'd like me to say that. He wasn't going to cut it as the lead vocalist, right? So we were instantly in a quandary. Now we had these 3 songs. We started off with 3, and they were completed songs that just needed a really killer, good lead vocal, vocalist. As luck would have it, again, my engineering job, I was working with a band at the studio, just engineering for them. And they referred me to who ended up being our singer on this guy, Rick. And the second he came into the studio and started singing, we're like, holy crap, this is our guy, right? This was like night and day with what Scott or I would have done.
Yeah, you can really, just on the opening, verses of Outlaw, you can already tell that he's a great singer. And I was looking online. Is it really the only thing he did, vocally?
You mean as far as on that album, or what the only project?
In the music business, is Captive Heart the only thing he's done, or?
No, he was. He was in some bands before us, which again I don't know 100% of the history, but he was in bands like we all were. And he's been in fact, years later, just recently, I re-upped with him for a very short time in a band he was already in. And I kind of came in this time as the last guy instead of the first one.
Yeah.
And it didn't pan out. I wish it would have. It's another long story in and of itself. But so he's been in a few things, but nothing more high profile. Not that we were high profile, but whatever level we were, nothing I don't think
Right.
as
Right.
developed as this was. Yeah. But
Yeah,
we
that's
were
a
really
shame.
lucky to find this guy, and he was unreal. I mean, it was almost blowing up microphones in the studio. He had such a powerful voice too. It wasn't just a good tone and a good voice, but he was freaking loud, you know. I mean, this guy had power to him. And so that was literally after that, you know, the first, I'd say 4 or 5 songs, now 6 songs, we completed with just the three of us. Then we started realizing, holy crap, we're going to need to play this stuff live. So
Hmm.
once again, working at the studio with other bands, I basically plucked 2 guys or 3 guys. Like again, I'm sure there's some hate mail going on about me somewhere, but we kind of maybe broke up a band or two by plucking a couple of guys out of it. But they even heard our demos and they're like, wow, we'll get on board with you guys, you know? So our drummer, Steve, and the other guitar player, Tim, they were both in a band together. And we kind of, I hope we weren't home wreckers or, you know, band breaker uppers, but we ended up grabbing those 2 guys, and I guess the rest that's pretty much was the core band, you know. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so
So, yeah. I mean, here's the band picture
y-
for.
yeah, that was one
Which
shot we took under a bridge in Chicago. There I am
which
with my leg up on the.
which one?
That's
Which one?
that's the cool rock
Oh,
star pose. You had to have the cool rock star pose.
Well, Rick's the guy in the middle up against the pole. I'm the one on his left or on the right side of the picture in the black
oh,
jacket and
okay.
the glasses. That's me.
Right.
When I
So
had a lot more hair.
three of you guys have the knees up. So who started that? Who was the first one to put the knee up?
I
You know
don't
what I
even know
mean?
if the photographer told us to do it or not. You know, we're like posable monkeys. Here, you put your arm up on the pole like you're holding it up. That was Tim on the far left there, and yeah,
Yeah, there's definitely a thing to
That's cool.
around rock bands and like the under bridges, right? There's definitely a thing there that someone has to analyze.
That's a cool
There's
place.
a
I mean,
lot
you're
of
kind of
fun
like you're
pictures.
underground, but you're
Yeah.
yeah, it was an
kind of
underpass under a road. You know, the photographer just liked that look. You know, kind of
yeah.
almost.
That's cool.
I don't know what it was supposed to look like, but and it's funny that was our second batch of promo shots. The very first one, the same photographer did, but he got a girl to do our makeup. And honest to God, we didn't know till she was done. We came out looking like Poison, like we were
Oh,
kind of a hair. I mean, we had so much makeup on. We looked like 5 girls, you know. I mean,
wow.
and it was like, nah, this isn't quite what we're going for, you know. So we kind of quickly took off most
So
of it. And
right.
Yeah. No, I
So
see.
that
Like,
was
uh,
no, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
no, I was just gonna say at that time. So you guys put that album out in what, 91?
well, here's another. I know every one of these things is an involved story. We finished recording and probably around 92, 93. Everything,
Okay.
you know, whether with Peterick or whether our own stuff, we kind of were done with everything that had been recorded. And that was when, like I said, we had so much interest in this band. And in fact, I guess I should tell this part of the story at this point. Through our drummer Steve, he had a best. This is how stuff happens in the music industry. Everything's a connection, right? And nothing is obvious.
Oh, we hear it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So his best friend, our drummer, this guy Steve, his best friend had moved to LA and was getting married, right? And Steve was going out there to his friend's wedding. And he found out that the girl that his friend was marrying, her father, if you can follow that already, was the
Hmm.
head of publishing at Capitol Records, right? He was the
Okay.
publishing head. So right away, Steve, being the opportunist, he said, hey, can the rest of my band come out to your wedding, right? So he said, sure, yeah, come on. So we all flew out there, and I'll never forget, we were at this girl's parents' home the night before, and we were playing the demos. And her father, this guy at Capitol's Publishing, said, this stuff's phenomenal. He goes, but even better, he said, tomorrow at the wedding, my best buddy is going to be there. This is the girl's father talking. who had been the president of Capitol Records. This guy Don
Oh wow.
Zimmerman. He'd been, and by the way, another side note, he was Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue's uncle, or he
Oh.
still is, but so we met this guy Don Zimmerman, who again, obviously president of Capitol Records. We didn't even know it at the time, and he didn't even tell us that at the time. We were oblivious to it, but he did say he was starting a management company, new management company, and he wanted us as clients, as artists. So we were really one of his first artists he managed, because he'd kind of retired from Capitol, but still wanted to stay in the industry. So yeah, we
Right.
ended up with him as our manager, which
Oh,
was pretty cool. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So by the, I mean, by 93, 92, 93, it was already like too late, right? For
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. So I didn't finish my own train of thought. Yeah. So all of this came about. We had all these major labels, U.S. labels, the big ones, Geffen and all these other things, kind of after us, and they were flying us out to California and all this stuff. We thought it was like a done deal, especially having a guy like that as your manager, pretty big clout kind of guy. And overnight, it really honestly seemed that way. And I'm sure other bands have told you this too. The grunge thing came out, Seattle stuff, and those labels turned on us like we had cooties or whatever. They just wanted nothing. The same ones that were after you one week wanted nothing to do with you the next. So we kind of, the band got really obviously dejected at that point. We kind of broke up. The keyboard player went on tour with another band, just as kind of like a side guy. He wasn't a full member, but he toured with a band that had a deal at the time. And so we kind of just, that was where it ended, but 2 years later, so it was like 94 when we officially broke up. And 2 years later, our drummer, Steve, again, same guy, was writing songs for Nashville, country music stuff that he also did on the side. And through one of those like song placement service companies, whatever, he saw an ad in the back that said European record label seeks new artists in the likes of, Van Halen, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, whoever they're mentioning. And he
right.
called me and he's like, hey, this is exactly like us. Even though we're kind of broken up, he goes, you think I should, for the hell of it, one last thing, send a cassette? Back in the old days, you ship the tape, right? To this label in Europe. And literally a few days or weeks, whatever it was, they called and man, they definitely wanted to pick us up. So we, again, were one of the first signings to that MTM label, which was pretty new at the time, And then they
Yeah.
sub-licensed it to so many other European labels. In fact, we were, again, one of the first bands on that label Frontiers. You guys are aware of that. So
Yeah.
many bands are on that now. All the biggies, Boston and Journey and all those bands are on that label. Well, we were one of the little nobodies that kind of were one of the first on it before they really got going, So
Yeah. I mean, I have a bunch of those MTM releases, really good, and it's really. I mean, it's really interesting that they were doing it because nowadays there's a lot of like these legacy labels. Well, Frontiers releases new music, but they also release like stuff from back in the day that was never released. Or there's one called AOR Heaven
mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
also releases stuff or re-releases like stuff from back in the day. But there were not a lot of those types of labels back in the day. So it's really interesting that they were doing it like in '96. It was not that like in time. There's not a lot, not like there was not a lot of time between the time when they originally released it and the new one. So, but yeah, here it says Frontiers in Italy,
Yeah, in Italy, yeah.
Cargo, France. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
that is interesting.
Um,
Now it's not
mhm.
like you guys couldn't have had success, because even when Nirvana and those bands hit, you still had bands like Alias, who had More Than Words out. You had Giant with See You in My Dreams.
Yeah, that was
So
a great
these
band.
bands that were kind of in the same vein that you guys were. And when
Yeah.
I first heard Outlaw, I thought for sure that would be your hit song. Outlaw
That's
would
what a lot of
definitely.
people have kind of said. Yeah, that
That's a,
seems
I mean,
to,
that is a great song. I mean, and
yeah.
when oh wow, look, thank you. Look at, hey, this is a horror convention. You get served drinks when you're doing podcasts.
Not bad. That's a good deal.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
No problem. Have fun, guys.
Thank you.
That's awesome. But,
No, that's true. You know, Giant.
you
Yeah,
could have
Giant was a
had.
great band.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
that in fact, oh my God, Dan Huff, who was the guitar player in Giant, he ended up being one of the biggest producers in Nashville on all
Yeah,
these
you
Yeah.
know,
records and
Durbin
stuff.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
but
bunch of great.
again, it was our case, and a lot of other bands, though, on the other side of the coin, were just. It didn't seem like there was an opportunity, you know, because again, we still had this manager who I thought was so connected in the industry, he'd still wiggle us in there. And you know, one of the funniest things, side notes too, is we were out there one time in LA visiting him, and we were out on his boat, I think, during the day, and we got back to his house, and there must have been, this was pre the end of everything, obviously, there must have been 2 or 3 messages from these labels wanting to talk about signing our band, you know, leaving messages for him. And
Mm.
it was almost like we got the, you know, the feeling from it. He's like, yeah, we're going to hold out for something better. We're going to, and us, you know, we trusted him, but we were kind of like, you know, naive in the industry. I'm like, let's take something. Let's, you know, take a deal. But in retrospect, I don't know if we would have been worse off had we gotten something, but then had everything, you know, been dropped or them never promoted it. But we would have even been more uprooted out of, you know, maybe had to move out there to record or something. You know what I mean? It would have been
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe more
I mean,
disruptive than it ended
that's
up
also
being.
something that happened a lot. I mean, for example, Little Caesar, the band, not the
Mhm.
chain. Little Caesar, they got signed to Geffen, but they did nothing for them. I mean,
Yeah,
they did not publicize them. They did almost nothing for them. Same with Roxy Blue, got signed to Geffen as well. Trickster with MCA, Pretty Boy Floyd with MCA. I mean, there were
yeah,
big deals, but they did nothing to promote them, and
yeah. There
so
was no backing. They
no.
didn't back the bands, and
yeah,
especially when the whole grunge thing took off, and a lot of bands. I feel that a lot of bands were still trying to push out some really good material. But this was before all those bands like you guys, not you guys specifically, but that style, were all trying to do that grunge record. They were all trying to change their
yeah,
sound to kind of to go with what the times. And I never liked that. I
yeah.
never,
Well,
you know,
that's funny you bring that up because some of those labels, I don't remember which ones exactly, but they were telling us that if we, because they loved our band, they knew we were somewhat talented, right? And they're like, if you can instantly become Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or whatever, that type of thing, we'll sign you. Because that was at the beginning of that. They wanted a lot of bands like that.
yeah.
But obviously now I've got so many years of looking back, you understand what it was. But at the time, there was such a culture shock because we were, again, trying to do this Mutt Lang 12 snare drum big, you know, and this stuff sounded like a bad garage band, you know, to us at the time.
Mhm.
And so we're
Yeah,
like, I can't write like that, or we can't play like that. It wouldn't be legitimate, you know, we'd look like we were
yeah,
trying to
and
do something that didn't come
You'll be
naturally.
able to tell. You can tell.
Yeah,
you could tell. I mean, you ask Toto to record a punk album, and it's not gonna
yeah,
work.
yeah.
You can
That's a
have
great
the best.
example.
I mean, you
I mean,
can have
there
the
are a
absolute
handful.
best
There are a
musicians in the
handful of
world.
bands
Yeah.
that could pull it. Alice in Chains was one of them. I mean, they were all glammed out
Well,
prior
yeah, but
to,
there's
you know,
not
Yeah,
that much of a gap between like what Alice in Chains was doing in the '80s to what they did in the '90s, right? I mean, it's like,
no, I mean,
yeah.
Facelift is a totally different album than Dirt.
Hmm.
Those are two. I mean, you can listen to those two albums; they're totally different. Um, but I always felt like the AOR bands still had a little more um, a little more clout, I guess, than the glam bands because the glam bands kind of suffered from how they looked. It
yeah,
wasn't necessarily about how they sounded. It was more the look that kind of did those guys in. You guys
Hmm.
didn't have that. You didn't have, you know, aside from that one photo shoot
yeah.
or whatever it was. But you know, you guys were more like like I would say like a Journey or something like that. That you know, even
Exactly.
Def Leppard to that extent wasn't really a glam band.
No,
Um,
no, I agree. And I lump us so, you know, oftentimes it depends who you talk to, what they consider us to be. But I think all of the guys in our band, and me included, we totally aligned way more with like the arena rock, you know, Boston,
Hmm.
Journey, Foreigner, that era guys, and then the Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, you know, hard
Yeah.
rock stuff. We really
Survivor. Yeah.
never were, yeah, we definitely weren't like a metal band. Sometimes people do call us metal, and I'm like, we're not metal. We got ballads on there that are pretty
Have you
candy
listened to
ass,
the record?
yeah. So it's, yeah, we definitely weren't
Yeah.
a metal band, and but still, I mean, even as much as Journey has persevered, and certain bands are now huge again, but there was that little period there where, if you kind of look up the timeline, like Journey basically dissolved. They weren't right in that thing. Even they weren't needed or wanted, or Def Leppard. What was that album X of theirs? They were trying to do a kind of their version of a
Or
grunge thing.
Slang.
Slang. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Was the
Slang.
album, yeah.
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 And
And a lot of you would see like Foreigner at like county fairs, or
yeah,
it was just a
It was
weird
dark times.
it was a weird place in music, yeah.
yeah,
And the bands that were coming out were, and I can't say that a band is bad or they suck, or I don't do that. But there were bands that were inferior to that style of music. There were bands that coming out. It was like, really, that's going to be what you want to listen to,
yeah.
And I know that some of those bands had their followings, but there were a lot of bands that just seemed to be. It was just like the grunge era didn't last nearly as long as the hard rock movement. And I think a lot of that was because it went the same way. A lot of bands were just starting to become cookie cutter bands, and everybody started tripping over each other, and every record company was just pushing out. It's like, okay, we already went through this,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
guys are doing it again. And I mean, and maybe that's the way of the music business. I don't know.
I think it always is going to be. And, even as much as I'm kind of lumped in with that 80s thing, which is that was our era, but, it got to an extreme, as you guys even mentioned, with some of those hair metal things, that they were kind of cartoonish looking already at that point.
Yeah.
And even the music itself became a little cartoonish. And people kind of choked on it at the end, and I understand it. So like the pendulum's always swinging back and forth. It's like, all right, it goes too far to one extreme, it's got to come swinging back the other. And grunge was kind of the antithesis of that. We're going to wear ripped up flannel shirts and look like we just woke up, and that became
And
not
that
only
was,
the look but the sound of it too. We're not going to really layer and be fastidious with the production. We're just going to make this raw, almost like a punk aesthetic, like just organic
Yeah.
and stripped down. And
yeah.
so I understand it.
I remember reading somewhere that there's a study that says that it's 20 to 30 years the time that it takes for a type of culture to be cool again, right? So in the 80s, for example, there was a lot of 50s stuff, like with Back to the Future and
Mhm.
Stray Cats and all that type of stuff,
Mhm.
right? Uh, that was 30 years before the 80s, and nowadays the 80s are cool again, and that's 30 years after the 80s. So
Time for a captive
there's
heart reunion.
yeah, it's time for the captive hiring, guys. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and actually, that was something I was going to ask. Like, was there ever like talk of getting the band back together and recording something else, or?
I've stayed in touch with Rick, our singer, and to a lesser extent, but still somewhat, Steve, the drummer, and Tim, our guitar player. And, I'd probably be the one guy that would be the first to be into doing that and trying to
Mhm.
reform it. I never, maybe I haven't really officially, presented that idea to them or brought it up, but I don't know if they'd be up for doing that. And again, I don't even know, to be honest, if there really is enough of a, I guess maybe there would be. You guys tell me if there'd be enough of an audience somewhere for it. So we're
I,
not playing
I
an empty hall somewhere.
I would definitely
definitely.
think
I
a
mean,
homecoming
I
show
think
would
yeah.
pull in
Yeah.
the
Nowadays,
crowd.
it's different. I mean, with the internet, there's stuff has become so what's the word for it? Compartmentalized. Like there's so little niche
Is that
for
a word? Really? That's a word?
I think
I think in my mind it is. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I
We
mean,
make up
there's
our own words here at Hollywood Dreams.
Totally cool.
We're the Shakespeare's of rock and roll. Um, so on the what I'm trying to say is that back in the day, trends tend to like come from the up to like from the radios and the big labels kind of decided what was trendy, what was what people were gonna hear to, right? And that's how maybe how the glam metal died and the grunge movements got started, right? But there's you got fans back there, Dave.
I
um,
know.
and
This is what happens at horror movie conventions, guys.
Keep the
That was
groupies
after
yeah,
much
behind the
fun.
door.
So
yeah. Yeah, so what I was saying is that nowadays, like doesn't it's like a grassroots movement, right? Like people you can on the internet you can find whatever the fuck you want, right? Like if you're into like hardcore 80s green grind, I don't know, jazz
Yeah.
fusion, you
what
can probably
genre is that
find
movie?
someone that's playing that, right? And m- Before the internet, I don't know how you could find it. Would certainly be more difficult to find that.
Yeah.
So now,
Well, my only thought on all of that is it's like everything else. There's positives and negatives about it,
oh,
right?
for sure, yeah,
And obviously, yeah, pre-internet and pre all this stuff, there was like, yeah, people were exposed to it by either word of mouth or radio, and so on.
hmm
But the one thing, because again, I teach these music production classes at the college here, so I'm always talking to these young kids now who are 18, 21, whatever. And I said, you think about it. And when I was even a little kid, around 12 years old, 13, because I was 12 in 1976, just to date me for a second, you can do the math, right? And at the same time, not a lot of people remember this or think about it. There were all those arena rock bands, right? That we've already talked about, the Boston Journey, Foreigner, Styx, REO. Okay, you got that camp. There was all the progressive bands, Genesis, Yes, ELO, ELP, Rush, making not only out there, but making their pivotal albums, the greatest albums.
yeah,
At that same time, the Eagles, Steely Dan, Fleetwood Mac, those kind of pop things, they were making their biggest albums. You had the punk stuff with the Clash, Ramones, Sex
yeah,
Pistols, all of that was, and throw in disco yet with the Bee Gees and all that stuff, right? So all of that was going on at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
Some of
incredible
these
to think
artists,
about it.
and the people weren't as, like you were using the word compartmentalized or segregated or whatever. Now I see with my students, a lot of them are only into whether it's hip hop or whatever, but even within that or thrash metal, whatever the case may be, they're very, very opinionated and they
Mm.
don't want to open their eyes and ears and minds to at least hear something and be aware of it, and sometimes I'll play them for various reasons. I'll play them a Steely Dan track and they're like, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm just, but they would never be aware of it, even in this day and age when it's all out there. So I
Yeah,
think
well,
sometimes people, yeah,
yeah, that's incredible. And actually, you just reminded me of something that I was gonna mention at the start. I've been like I've been delving into a YouTube rabbit hole lately that I found, which is reaction videos for songs, right? So there's this subgenre of people on YouTube that react to songs, right?
I've seen them.
Famous songs.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and it blows my mind because I mean I can understand if you want to do a reaction video to some obscure, like I don't know, right? Or maybe not so obscure. Like I want to react to Pretty Boy Floyd. Like it's obscure enough that warrants like a reaction video, right?
Yeah.
But there's some video like I react to Imagine by John Lennon. I mean, how can you go 30 years of your life without hearing Imagine
Exactly.
by John Lennon, right? It's
That's the thing
incredible.
that amazes me is like some of those
Yeah.
people, yeah, they're hearing these iconic songs and they're like, that's their first, wow, that was out there.
I mean,
I've
have
had
you ever
students,
walked into a supermarket before? I mean, it's,
yeah, yeah.
it's all
and
over the place.
and you can
I've had,
see
Yeah.
the legitimacy of their shock on their face, like, wow,
yeah.
this is really good,
I've
and
had students that, honest to God, not many of them, but some of them didn't know who the Beatles were.
Yeah.
Actual students of
That's,
mine. They've literally never heard of that. I'm like, that's not even a band anymore. That's like, like the
yeah,
Pope or
it's just
something or a
yeah,
president. I mean, it's like,
and
yeah.
it's crazy. Diversity is very important in anything, um, and especially in music. I mean, you gotta have there. Like I always told myself, and maybe it's because I was this way. I never gave up on the music that I grew up loving. I never stopped listening to Poison or Motley Crue or Bon Jovi. I never did. But I didn't not listen to Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or those bands. I was kind of cool just having it all. It was, and I was really into a band out of Seattle called Mother Love Bone, who
Mhm.
eventually became Pearl Jam after their singer passed away from a heroin overdose. Um, I felt like there was a gap there between arena rock or glam rock or whatever you want to call it and the grunge movement. And I feel like I was never closed minded like that. I always I was cool with just being that guy that would
And
accept
that's
it all because you never know what is sitting at the next, at the
yeah,
next.
and that's the way I think it should be, and that's how better music would be made by the artists, and more music would be enjoyed by the public if everybody kind of were that way and not so
Yeah.
tied to their specific thing. And maybe that I don't know if anybody can even hear it in any of our Captive Heart stuff, but again, the keyboard player and I that did most of the writing, we were very much influenced by the same stuff, but very varied stuff at the same time. So almost all the stuff I was mentioning, yeah, there were all those. My favorite band ever growing up in the beginning was Boston, right? That was the first album I ever bought, the first Boston record. So I was a huge Boston fan. And again, even the technology, and I didn't know anything about this. I was 12 when that record came out, right? But
Hmm.
I just something wearing headphones, I'd be listening to that thing and going, holy crap, that sounds phenomenal. I didn't understand how a record was made, but that was kind of our part of our history. But then we also got into that Steely Dan stuff, just for if for no other reason but the purity and the perfection in their productions, that clarity, like you were saying earlier, how our demos sounded pretty polished. Well, because we kind of had that as another influence, and like I already
Hmm.
said, the Mutt Lange Def Leppard stuff. And I was even into Chicago, the band Chicago with the horns
Yeah.
Yeah.
and stuff. Todd Rundgren, if you know Todd Rundgren as a writer
Yeah.
artist.
Yep.
So we had a pretty eclectic background. We weren't like a metal band that just only listened to Black Sabbath growing up, right, and developed from
Yeah.
there or something.
I
And
mean,
so we
the
kind of had a,
diversity comes out in the music that you guys did,
I
and
think it did,
you
yeah.
can listen to the first three tracks, and you can tell you guys were, in a different range completely, and
Yeah, I don't know
it
if
was
that was from a record label standpoint. We never really, well, obviously the label that did sign us in Europe took it as it was, but I didn't know if a major label would think we're almost too um, eclectic, and
yeah,
they're always
Hmm.
trying to make you, you're going to be the next this or you're going to be the that. And we did have these kind of ballady tracks. We had stuff that was more pop, um, if it leaned that way. Some of them were a little harder edged, but it was kind of varied. And I don't know if the label would have, a US label, like a major thing would have really liked that or tried to dissuade us and become more consistently one sound.
well, I mean, I don't know, there
I
was a
mean, you
band
had
on
like you had bands like Glass Tiger, for example, that were pop, had big pop hits, but
yeah,
also had sort of AOR
or
melodic rock songs.
what a band like Stage Dolls,
Mm.
who were
I
on
don't even
Stage
know.
Crystal.
Dolls.
Dude,
I don't
that
know.
band was very
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah,
all
for
over the
sure.
place. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Well, that'd
and
be
those
cool.
guys were excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, which song's your favorite on the album, Chuck?
My favorite?
Yeah.
Actually, I got to look at my own copy over refresh my own memory. I mean, there were quite a few for different reasons. Geez, isn't it always hard to answer?
Yeah.
Outlaw was one of my more songs. Like I said earlier today, our keyboard player and I wrote. It was like a Lennon McCartney kind of thing, right? But
Yeah.
usually,
Yeah,
with that said, one song would be more his, and one song would be more mine, and we'd kind of, finish each other's things or whatever. But um, I do remember the reference points for a lot of this stuff. Like that "Till the End" song, which finishes the record. That kind of acousticy
Yeah.
ballad thing. Obviously, that was kind of like when "Extreme More Than Words" was kind of
Hmm.
yeah,
out.
yeah.
We were kind of
Right.
writing in that ilk. Scott wrote that "Ride of Your Life" tune, which was kind of, I don't know if it is or isn't, but it was considered at the time kind of more of like an Aerosmith kind of thing. I don't know if you remember the song, but kind of would be something maybe Aerosmith would do. So I don't know.
Yeah, I
There
can
were
feel
a few of
that
those
vibe.
that I really like. Actually, Shattered Dreams, which is the fourth cut on here, our
That's a
drummer
great
wrote.
song.
That's his song. That's not even one of
Good
Scott's
song.
mine. That was our drummer's track.
That's a great
And
song.
yeah, so I don't know. They all here in a head. Different.
Yeah.
I think my favorite it's the second song on the album. It's too late.
It's too late. Yeah, I wrote that
Those
one more too.
those
Yeah,
second songs, man. There's always
Yeah,
that second song. I think that's like those are always to
the
me the
sweet spot.
strongest songs is that second track. But I'd go with Outlaw.
well,
That's
Yeah,
my
well, I
favorite
mean,
song on
for
there.
sure,
yeah.
Outlaw should have been the hit single for sure, but It's Too Late should have been the B side of that single.
It's funny. I can't even give my favorites as much as I remember. Like I said, the backstories on these things. And It's Too Late. I wrote. I remember I was watching a movie one night, and you probably won't even remember the movie. It was called The Wildlife. It was one of those teen, almost like Fast Times at Ridgemont High kind of movie, but it was called The
Wasn't
Wild.
Sean Penn's brother in that? I
Sean
believe.
Penn, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Wow, good memory. But the
They like
key thing
animals.
was Eddie Van Halen did the soundtrack to it,
Yep.
to the
Yep.
movie. So I was listening to this or watching this movie and listening to this, and there's something in there. Again, I didn't rip him off, but the feel of the opening riff of this "It's Too Late" was kind of something like what he had been playing, like a little noodling thing in a scene in the movie.
Yeah.
And I was just
Oh
had my
yes.
guitar, and I'm like, hey, man, I could kind of do something in that ilk because it inspires you at the moment, and obviously
Yeah, I mean,
the rest of
I'm
the
a
stuff.
sucker for those types of mid-tempo, like feel good melodic rock songs,
Yeah.
sort of like
Roll your windows
Animal
down and
by
cruise
Def
song.
Leppard, for example. Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
yep.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I love
Turn it
that. So
up. Yeah.
It's Too Late hits all the right spots. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
it's nice of you guys to say all this. It's very much appreciated. That's nice that you, like I say, I'm always amazed when people are even aware of this stuff. Really, I'm surprised. It's
I
kind of
still
cool.
can't get over the fact that they're demos.
Yeah. So yeah, like I've been saying, it's like we did this stuff at the studio, all basically sneaking in. And then like when we did connect up with Jim Peterick through that connection, he kind of started working with us. And we did record those songs more as a band. So by now we did have the band together anyway. And we went to his home studio, in a beautiful home studio, as you'd guess, with his songwriting money that built a beautiful studio. And we did track everything much more. Everybody played. I was no longer doing the bass parts. We had our bass player playing bass. We had real drums Steve played on. But it's pretty easy to hear those on the record, the ones that were from that period. And it's no better or worse. It's just, again, a little bit more what we would sound like live, compared to what we were trying to achieve with studio stuff, trickery,
Yeah.
not trickery, but just make everything bigger than everything else. That was the 80s mantra. We would do like the five of us were all, besides our singer, Rick, the five of us, like I said, weren't really good lead vocal material, but we were really good backup singers. In fact, other people were hiring us to sing backup vocals as a band on their records. So we would
Right.
group around a mic, and I was also the engineer, so I'd run into the control room and be flipping tracks. But we would do like a 24-track slave reel of background vocals. So most of those songs that you hear, those Def Leppard, stuff, that was five guys singing live, but multi-tracking it many, many times, to thicken the life out of it. I mean, nothing we invented, obviously, but kind of a homage to the Mutt Lang, make it big. And the same thing with guitars back then. You'd play the same rhythm guitar parts 6, 8 times just to make it huge.
Yeah.
And a lot of that you can do easily in the computer now and copy paste stuff. And we were doing it on tape and bouncing things down and, just running out of tracks and having to figure out how do we consolidate this because we got one tape
Yeah.
machine.
Yeah. There's an
It's
extra
crazy.
merit there. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
do you
For
ever
sure.
do you ever just like sit down, lights off, maybe a glass of wine, nice fire burning, headphones on, and listen to that record and just reminisce about that?
I haven't listened to the whole thing in a long time, but I listen occasionally to because I'll tell you how, and like for everybody, like I'll be on YouTube myself, right? And the more you're on it, the more stuff pops up with
Hmm.
things you'd be interested, whether it's recording information. I watch a lot of, you know, engineering type stuff too,
Mhm.
and sometimes, yeah, all of a sudden there'll be somebody that on their YouTube channel is playing Captive Heart stuff. And some of those things have gotten moderate views, I mean, nothing crazy, but not Taylor Swift views by any stretch. Yeah.
Let's
Who
not
can,
talk
right?
about Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think she got enough attention this week.
Yeah, exactly. At the Bear game, at their pathetic loss. Being from Chicago, dear God, our team is.
I'm a Dolphins fan, and the Dolphins' performance should have outplayed Taylor Swift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. They creamed Denver, right?
70
And,
points.
yep. And now
Can't
we
say
get
that too
Denver this
often.
week. Yeah. But
Santi, I see you rolling your eyes. You're like, that's not football, guys.
yeah, I know, there you go. Argentinian, right? Soccer. That's the real football. It
Well,
is
you
on a
guys got
worldwide basis.
Messi
Yeah.
playing for Miami, so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Messi brought some luck to South Florida, buddy.
yeah, yeah.
It's amazing in America how we kind of, think that our sports, football and basketball are the big thing, but worldwide it's like dwarfed by soccer, when you take the whole
Oh, yeah.
world into consideration. But
Yeah, well, yeah, I always
yeah,
find it funny how there's a baseball world league, world league where only the U.S. plays.
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. We're the world
the,
champion, the World
the
Series
world
of baseball, and
champions.
it's yeah, two American teams, right?
Well, to be fair, baseball is big in Japan and oddly enough in Venezuela as well. But I
Yeah,
guess
that's
that's the U.S. influence, I guess. But
yeah. A lot of Central American players are coming up, and they're
hmm
some of the better players in baseball. Sure, But yeah. So I don't even. Now I got off track of what we were talking about.
That's
that's
my
a
fault.
we do that. Don't worry.
That's good.
Um,
That's good.
Hey, we
so,
can always do a second episode if there's something you remember.
Oh dear
yeah.
Lord. All right.
So to sort of wrap it up, we haven't done this list in a while, but we like to do like um, what are your top 10 like if you're gonna get stranded on an island, what albums would you take? Like, what are your top 10 favorite like island records?
My top 10.
Yeah.
All right. And but they don't have
Well,
to be
top
in
10.
order.
I would say let's make it like top five.
Okay.
Top 10
All right. Well, that
makes too
makes it
much.
even harder.
I was about
Um,
to say, that's a new feature, top 10.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Top five. Well, maybe again, because of the history and it being my first album, that first Boston record's got to be one of mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that was probably their best record where they came out of the gate with the best thing they ever did. Their records kind of went a little downhill as the years went on. The second one I thought was really good too, but beyond that, they were kind of not as great. Jumping to a complete different genre, probably Asia by Steely Dan.
Oh, yeah.
Totally
Nice.
not rock related, but again, back to my influence with those guys. Um, Geez, I'm a huge Genesis fan, the prog
Yeah.
stuff. So literally any Genesis album, but
Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins.
I love Peter Gabriel too. But as far as this, they'll probably get some hate mail for me or something. But I think as far as Genesis goes, maybe it's just because the era I got into them was Phil Collins, because obviously Gabriel
Mm,
left in '74 after Lamb Lies Down, right?
yeah.
And so obviously he had his place, and his solo career was obviously amazing too, right? So nothing against Gabriel whatsoever, but I kind of got to go with Collins just because of
Yeah.
familiarity with more of the
I do
records,
as well. Yeah.
I would
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. And so many people. That's another guy on a tangent story that so many people know him for those adult contemporary piano ballads with him at the piano. Nobody realizes what a wicked drummer that guy was. And in
Oh,
the
yeah.
Brand X, that fusion band he had and stuff, that dude was a monster drummer. I mean, aside from even the Genesis stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
He was a power drummer. Like I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
just like thundering drummer. I mean,
But he could do wicked jazz stuff, like Billy Cobham, those kind of guys. He was the drummer like that too. So I loved a lot of that late '70s, early '80s Genesis. The Duke album was good. Wind and Wuthering was great. All that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's Boston. There's Genesis. What else did I say already? Steely Dan,
Steely
Asia.
Dan.
I
Yeah.
got two more, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
No pressure.
Maybe, all right, 1984, Van Halen.
Oh yeah.
That's gonna be one. Um, and lastly, let's pick something else eclectic. All right, Escape by Journey.
No?
Oh, well, for sure. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's classic.
I
Yeah.
was about to say you can say Captive Heart if you really want to here.
Captive Heart.
That would be kind of. I'm not that much out front with stuff. I wouldn't pick my own album. A little shy for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's so interesting, with now that you guys have brought up all these memories of stuff, and like I keep saying over and over, and you've alluded, these were really demos, and I just, as decent as they turned out for me still learning as an engineer, it was literally one of the first early things I was working on. I was still dying back then. I would still have loved like Mutt Lang to get his hooks into this thing and see what a guy like that, because I really view him as a genius. I mean, he really
Yeah.
is. And to have someone with that unbelievable, we thought we had attention to detail with production, but that guy's insane. I've read stories on him. He's very reclusive, so he doesn't do interviews and things, but I've
Yeah.
heard stories from, engineers he's worked with, or the bands or Def Leppard talk about him. And the guy
Mhm.
borderlines on like insane, literally in perfection. And what no one else in their right mind can hear, he hears. And but they do the stuff to satisfy him really, but in the end it makes for this stuff that when you guys think about when that Hysteria record came out, which was like 87 I think, and
Yeah.
so
87.
many other bands, that was the height of the whole, hard rock, hair metal, whatever. That record, when it would play on the radio or anywhere else, it dwarfed, Warrant's albums or Poison's records or something. I mean, it just made them sound like kids.
And
And it
even
was
to
Oh,
all,
this
sure.
day, it still sounds fresh. I put that album. Def Leppard's my favorite band, so
oh,
I
there
can
you
put
go.
Hysteria on at any given moment, and that album still sounds so new to me. And
Yeah.
you always hear something different. There's always something in there. Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
hear that.
I've read so many stories or whatever I can find on it, and those guys, they ended up having to sell, I don't know how many units, but they were literally like $5 million in debt to make
Yeah.
that record. And it was all because the label and their management allowed Mutt Lang free reign. And he's like, this is going to take 4 years to make this record, but it's not going to be ready before I say it's done.
Yeah.
And those guys were willing participants. Other bands might not be able to hang on with him, but when you hear the stories of those guys overdubbing string by string in a chord, so they wouldn't
Yeah.
even play a whole chord. He'd make them play each note in the chord, and now that's further than we ever went. I used to just stack the parts, but that was unheard of. So
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it paid off for them, and the fact that they stuck it out when Rick Allen lost an arm. I mean,
yeah,
not too many bands would do that. I mean, that's a hard thing to have a drummer who goes through something like that, and to stand by him because he's your friend.
yeah.
I mean,
That
that's
was a big part
the
of it, and also
camaraderie between those guys it's something else. And
totally
here we
true.
are
And
now, 2023, and they're still playing stadiums and arenas and everything else.
yeah,
So
Mhm.
and they're lucky in a weird way, as bad as it sounds. I mean, the poor guy lost his arm, but because of how they were making that record anyway, and it was mostly programmed whether he kept both arms or not, it
yeah,
was like they had a lot more leeway to keep going forward. I mean, like if Rush, that happened to Rush, I don't know
yeah,
what would have happened, because
Right.
obviously they were much more of a, Neil Peart being the god he was on drums,
hmm
needed all his limbs and then some. But it was kind of a fortunate situation, and Mutt Lang knew how to like build him up and let him get to where he could play again. But at the same time, they were able to continue working on the record.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
cool.
So Chuck, I mean, it's been great talking to you. I mean, it was really interesting, as I was saying at the start. I always wanted to know more about Captive Heart. I feel like I do now,
great.
and
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, no, I always say this, right? Knowing the band behind the music, for lack of a better term, knowing the band and stories and how songs were recorded or where did they come from. I mean, it adds a little more to the music. I always enjoy the music more when I know, like, I don't know, what was your, where were you when you were recording said
My
song?
pooch in the background. Sorry. Something must have got him angry. Speedy, I'm almost done. Relax. Sorry.
So yeah, no, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that I really like when I get to know something about bands that there's not a lot of information around, and I don't know, it adds something else, an extra layer to the music,
No,
and
and again,
it's fun.
I'm glad it does, and I really appreciate both you guys wanting to have me on this thing. It was fun. I enjoyed it, and glad again
Awesome.
that you and anybody else out there is kind of aware of the band and likes the music. That means a lot. That somebody was out there hearing it at some point. Very
Well, we
cool.
will definitely share whatever we can on our social media outlets and everything for you, and hopefully keep the word out there and get more people interested in the band.
I
I
mean,
mean,
who knows?
it
Maybe
deserves to
this
be
will
heard.
kickstart Captive Heart reunion? Question mark.
I'll give you, I'll
Who
give you the
knows?
phone numbers to the other guys. You can call them up and get the ball rolling. See if they.
Maybe
Yeah,
hey, maybe we could do a full band interview next time.
Yeah, who
that's your
knows?
guys'
Yeah,
thoughts and decision.
sky's
Yeah,
the limit. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be awesome.
We'll
All right.
we'll do anything here on Hollywood Dreams. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Well, cool. And
Hey,
enjoy your.
if it'll help get good music out there and keep it around for my kids to grow up listening to, or my grandkids to even be like, hey, I like this. I
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you know
yeah. I think we
Elvis,
still got some.
Elvis's music is still out there.
Yeah, I think we've got some good tunes. I don't know if I could fit in the tight pants anymore, but
Please don't
have
even
to
try.
try to grow out the hair again, right?
Leave that to Steel Panther. We're cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
All right, man. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I'll let you know when the episode goes out. It will probably be sometime next week.
Okay,
I'll let you,
awesome.
I'll make a little post about it so you can share it, and yeah, we'll keep in touch
Definitely,
for
definitely.
that Captive Heart reunion. uh, yeah, Monsters of Rock Cruise 2024 featuring Captive Heart.
I'll get those guys in
Let's just try
line.
to
We'll
get a
do it.
reunion first.
Yeah. Everybody's almost mostly retired anyway, so what else have they got to do? Let them get their chops back and
Yeah,
go ahead.
you guys, you
All
guys could,
right.
you guys could still play about a 45-minute set without taking a nap, right?
As long as the ventilators are there. Can't jump around like I used to.
Uh,
Oh man.
you could try.
I could
Yeah,
try. Maybe hey, it'll be incentive to get in shape, right?
There
yeah,
you go.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
Motivation.
Yeah. Yep. Well,
Okay.
thank you guys
Cool.
again so much for this. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
It was our
Awesome. Thank
pleasure,
you.
man. Thank you and take care. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Hollywood Dreams.